All right, guys, we're kicking off week one of the NFL. And what better way to do that than with a rankings video? I hear they do pretty well in the YouTube algorithm, right? Well, today we're going to be ranking all 32 NFL teams and according to how I think they are relevant to fantasy football, with number 1 being most relevant and number 32 being least relevant. And hopefully you can take the data that I compiled in this video and apply it in some logical or reasonable way throughout the season. Maybe you need a waiver wire pickup or you need a late flex start, and you can see, okay, listen, this is a team that was ranked highly for relevancy to fantasy football and they have a good matchup this week. Maybe we'll take a look at their depth pieces. So as always, let me know what you think of these rankings down in the comments below. Like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you are new, because we're just kicking off this NFL season. It's going to be a very fun one. And as always, I'll cue that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football for our first ever rankings video. As I mentioned in the intro, we're ranking all 32 NFL teams 1 to 32 based on how relevant I think that they're going to be for fantasy football in the 2023 season. And yes, I will admit this ranking system is a little bit arbitrary, but I did put some thought and mathematical prowess behind it. So what I did is I broke down 5 separate categories for fantasy football. So we have the quarterback, ranked on a scale of 1 to 5. We have wide receivers ranked 1 to 10. Obviously, 10 being a great wide receiver room, 1 being a pitiful wide receiver room. Running backs are also 1 to 10. Tight ends are 1 to 5. I kept quarterback and tight end because you typically only are playing with one of those positions. They're not as relevant as wide receiver or running backs, so I wanted to weight those position players a little bit more. Then I also threw in a defense, and the way I made the defense work was if you had a pitiful defense, looking at you, Arizona Cardinals, you got a 5, basically saying, the mindset behind that was if you have a bad defense, you're going to be giving up points like crazy, and you're going to need to score points to catch up. And so basically, if you need to score points to catch up, that's going to be very good for fantasy football, because that means your offense is going to be on the field quite a bit, trying to push the ball down the field, and translates into fantasy football points. And that was ranked on a scale of 1 to 5 as well. And then we just summed those up to give us a total, and obviously the higher your total is, the better it's going to be for your relevancy score to fantasy football. Now this again is fairly arbitrary, but I feel like a little bit less arbitrary because originally I was just going to be like, okay, pick one team, Houston Texans. Now, is Jacksonville more relevant or less relevant based on just the vibes? Thought that was probably a pretty poor way to do the rankings, so hopefully this kind of brings some sort of standardization to how I rank these players or rank these teams. And maybe going forward we add some categories. So if you want to give me some feedback down in the comments below, I only ranked relevancy by quarterback, the 5 positions that I mentioned, but maybe I need to add a strength of schedule index. Looking right now, Cleveland Browns, they're ranked quite high. They're currently tied for 9th in this index here, but playing in the AFC North, they do have a pretty hard strength of schedule, so maybe they need to be bumped down a little bit based on a strength of schedule index. Also, maybe we need to add a volatility index. There's some teams that are quite low, but because of how stable the pieces are, I mean, we're looking at Carolina Panthers being in the the bottom 5 of my index right now, but looking at how stable that running back position is with Miles Sanders being a true workhorse, in my humble opinion, maybe that volatility index needs to be factored into how reliable these pieces are for fantasy football. So something to workshop, something to go forward with, and maybe hopefully make this algorithm a little bit better next year. One last thing I want to add is the best positioned, the best team at each position got an extra bonus point. So Kansas City for Patrick Mahomes got 6 points instead of the maximum possible 5. Justin Jefferson and the Minnesota Vikings got 11 instead of 10 for wide receivers. The 49ers got 11 instead of 10 for the running back position, and then Kansas City also got 6 for the tight end position with Travis Kelce. Well aware that he hyperextended his knee and might be out for 1 to 2 games based on that injury, but this list was made prior to that injury, and hopefully he's just he's proved to be an outlier at the tight end position. Maybe he's an outlier as far as recovery. Maybe he comes back and doesn't miss too much time, but we're going to do this video as if Travis Kelce is not going into the season injured. So without further ado, let's jump into these rankings. And tied for first, we have 2 teams tied for first, and those are both the Minnesota Vikings and Los Angeles Chargers. And not wholly unsurprising here, you have both of these players, or both these teams that have players that are generally selected in the first round. You have Justin Jefferson for the Vikings, and you have Austin Eckler for the Los Angeles Chargers, and you also have a myriad of other supporting pieces that go in the middle rounds. You have Keenan Allen in the 4th round, Mike Williams in the 7th. Jordan Addison is a guy I think is going to be very, very relevant for the wide receiver position for the Minnesota Vikings. You have tight ends that range from above average in Hawkinson to probably an average. I gave the Chargers number 3 for Gerald Everett just because, despite being old, despite not being as valuable, he got a lot of play and a lot of usage last season as a tight end. And, you have quarterbacks that came off of last fantasy football season being in the top 10. So Minnesota Vikings and Los Angeles Chargers, very, very happy looking at them for depth pieces. And also, they do get a bump. They don't have defenses that inspire confidence in me. So I think they're going to have to, counteract it on the offensive side and really put up a lot of points. Now we move on to 2 teams that are tied for 3rd. It's going to be the San Francisco 49ers and the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I'm surprised at how high Jacksonville ended up on my rankings, but going through how I ranked all the position players, it actually makes quite a bit of sense. Again, I did give them a pretty poor score for the defense. You have Trayvon Walker, you have Caleb on Chase on, but again, still not a defense that they've really invested a lot into. And I think when they're playing outside of the AFC South, they're going to have to score a lot of points to keep up on. And then they do have, and like I said, I do see similarities in the 49ers and the Jacksonville Jaguars. They both have a myriad of offensive weapons. You have 2 high-end wide receivers for both. Definition of high-end is a little liberal there, but Debo and Ayuk with the Niners. You have Ridley and Christian Kirk, who finishes as a wide receiver 1 last year. You also have great running back rooms for both. I mean, with 49ers, you have CMC, who's a potential 1st overall pick, backed up by Elijah Mitchell, who's a great player of his own right. You have Travis Etienne for the Jaguars, and then you have Tank Bigsby as the backup, who I think is going to fill out more, 1A, 1B role rather than a true backup. So, San Francisco and Jacksonville Jaguars come in at tied for 3rd. Tied for 5th, not that surprising either. We have the Detroit Lions and Cincinnati Bengals, and I think these guys are just offensive juggernauts. I don't really need to talk about how good either of those teams are. We've been over, arguably, it was hard not to give the 11-point bump in the wide receiver position to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but I wanted to favor Jordan Addison because my hot take is that Jordan Addison is going to outproduce T. Higgins as a wide receiver 2 this season, and I'm going to give Justin Jefferson just a slight edge over Jamar Chase. Why the Cincinnati Bengals fall maybe a little bit lower is I don't have a lot of confidence in Joe Mixon. Maybe if someone else was doing these rankings, they would rank him higher, but I kind of gave them just an average score at the running back position. Talked about this in my preseason fallers, with how they restructured his contract. It just doesn't give me a lot of confidence in how the team wants to utilize Joe Mixon in the running back role. And then, again, this channel is called Twin Takes Fantasy Football, but again, very, very close to changing our name to the Ben Johnson Fan Club here, as we're big fans of what Detroit is doing up there in the North United States. Again, a team that was top 5 in offensive efficiency and top 5 in points, and only seems to have really doubled down on that identity when it comes to an offensive juggernaut, drafting using the 12th overall pick on Jahmyr Gibbs and coming back with the third pick in the 2nd round, taking Sam Laporta. So, teams that I think are going to be very, very relevant for fantasy football. Moving into 2 teams tied at the 7th position. And this is how I wasn't biased, because tied for 7th, we have Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. If I was being completely arbitrary, I would rank the Eagles over the Cowboys, but this is the way the numbers fell, and I'm going to honor the algorithm that output the way these teams are ranked. So, and I think if I was making this arbitrary, I would probably put the Eagles over the Dallas Cowboys just because Jalen Hurts is that dude. Again, a guy that was tough not to give him that bonus point for being a top quarterback, but you do have to give your respect to Patrick Mahomes, and I was only going to allow myself 1 bonus point per position category. But, you do have a very dominant wide receiver room in A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. But where Philadelphia, and then, a huge fan of Dallas Goedert, but where they really fall flat, I only gave them 2 points in the running back category. I have zero confidence in picking an actual starter from the, giant squad they have lining up behind Jalen Hurts in the backfield, whether it's Swift, Penny, Gainwell, or Boston Scott, your guess is as good as mine. I don't think there's anyone who truly knows what Sirianni is going to trot out there week in, week out. I think it's going to be a true committee. For my money and for the best value at ADP, I'm going to go with Kenneth Gainwell because he's the one that showed, the least injury concern and, was very, very highly utilized in the Super Bowl, which is our most recent iteration we've seen of the Philadelphia Eagles. But again, I still don't have confidence in him being an every week starter. He's like a low end flex in my opinion, which really hurts the Philadelphia Eagles. The Dallas Cowboys, lower tier of a quarterback in Dak Prescott, but still a viable guy. I gave him a 3, just, I kind of view him as that average guy. Very top wide receiver talent with Gallup, Brandon Cooks, and CeeDee Lamb. Tony Pollard, I am going to give him his roses here. I may not be high on Tony Pollard as many other analysts, but I can't ignore the fact that, he is going to be that true workhorse in Dallas. And he's part of a very explosive offense that does like to utilize running back. So I did rank Tony Pollard quite highly, definitely over what the Eagles got. But, with Ferg, with Luke Schoonmaker, I did give him a very low score in the tight end. In the tight end position. So that's going to be my tied for 7th. Tied for 9th. This is when we find some surprises because we had not 1, 2, 3, 4. We had 5 teams all tied for 9th position in this algorithm. It's hard maybe with the, if I go into future iterations with the volatility index, with the strength of schedule index, maybe we'll get some more clear definitive rankings. But, on a scale where the max possible points was 35, you're going to have some duplicates. And right now we see a lot of teams crowded around that 9th to 13th position. So teams coming in that range are going to be the Atlanta Falcons, Las Vegas Raiders, Buffalo Bills, Baltimore Ravens, and Cleveland Browns. And, biggest shock here to me was going to be the Las Vegas Raiders and the Cleveland Browns. Maybe we look at strength of schedule for both of those teams, and if we had to factor in that index, maybe we drop them down a little bit more, just given, the teams they have to play in the AFC. But I think there's a lot of positivity to be looked at throughout each of these teams. You have the Atlanta Falcons, who, for as much as they've gone in the offseason, they did sign not Von Bell, the other safety from the Bengals, Jesse Bates, Terrell, AJ Terrell. He's an okay quarterback. We'll see if he bounces back. But again, the entire offseason was really dedicated to establishing their identity as a run-first offensive team. I don't think it's weird or wild to quote them as a potential top 10 fantasy football relevant team, just because they do have, maybe they get that bump because they play in such a weak division in the NFC South. But I think you're going to see a lot of fantasy relevance from Bijan Robinson. He'll be a top 5 running back in my estimation. And I do think there's still relevance for Drake London and Kyle Pitts, both guys who are highly touted at their respective positions. Both were top 10 draft picks in the real life NFL. So I think with all the talent surrounding skill position players, if Desmond Ridder can be even just a, moderately better passer of the ball than Marcus Mariota, because Marcus was averaging 9 to 10 passes per game and completing about 6 of them at some points in the season. It's going to be a huge boon to all the pass catchers with the Atlanta Falcons. Las Vegas Raiders, it's a real boom or bust team. And I think why I have them ranked so highly is because when you look at the pieces that you have in that offense, you do have really consistent pieces. You have Josh Jacobs, running back 3 in PPR, running back 1 overall in standard. You have a guy who's been the dominant force at the wide receiver position year in and year out for the past, 5 years, in Devontae Adams. I think, while I'm not completely sold on Jimmy Garoppolo being a great quarterback, he's a guy that can come in and, facilitate an offense and distribute a ball to these guys that could ultimately end up as top 10 players at their respective positions. And I do think that, they are another team that benefits from having a really poor defense. They get the bump. I gave them a 4 or a 5. I'm trying to scroll really quickly here. I gave them a 4 or a 5 for their defense, so that bumps up the score a little bit because it's atrocious. I mean, look at the news at Chandler Jones. Obviously, apparently he's been locked out. He's fighting with the administration over there, both with the GM and Josh McDaniels. So I think everything that revolves around their defense is going to be horrible. They're going to have to put up a ton of points, and we saw that be very beneficial for the skill position players. And even if you want to talk about extrapolating this data and applying it to some flex players or maybe some deeper reaches in leagues, Jacoby Myers is a guy that I think could be viable as a flex. And, even early in the offseason, before some of the reports came out, I said Hunter Renfrow was my favorite steal of the draft. Still could be a guy that could be a huge PPR machine in certain leagues. Buffalo Bills. I'm surprised they're this low. Again, maybe some of those adding those index would rearrange how relevant they are for fantasy. I do think they're a highly relevant team. You have a top quarterback who, if it wasn't for Patrick Mahomes, would have gotten that extra point bump. But I think where they fall off is that the running back position I've been very, very much out on as far as it comes to the Buffalo Bills. I mean, historically, we've seen this team finish in the past 3 seasons 30th overall at the running back position, 31st overall, and 30th overall. I just could not give them a high running back score. Yes, you have Stephon Diggs, but after the letdown of Gabe Davis, not something I'm going super high on. I only gave them an 8 at the wide receiver position. Only, I know. And again, going against with historical trends with the Buffalo Bills, rookie tight ends typically don't tend to produce as much as established veterans. So I'm not going to be all in on the hype of Dalton Kincaid just yet, which maybe means Buffalo falls a little bit behind some of those juggernauts that we are normally expected them to be with, like the Bengals, like the Eagles and such. Again, we'll group Baltimore Ravens and Cleveland Browns. Baltimore Ravens, I do expect to be here. I think maybe they could be even a little bit more relevant than what this algorithm has indicated to me. I think they do get a 5 for Lamar Jackson. I mean, he's an MVP caliber quarterback. He's a dual threat quarterback. He does it all. He's coming into a Todd Monken system that I do personally believe in. I know some people are skeptical about it. We haven't seen it's an entire projection. I believe in it. I am a huge fan of Zay Flowers, but objectively looking at this, I did have to give them kind of an average score for wide receivers. You're bringing back Rashad Bateman, who's perpetually injured, just coming off of Liz Frank surgery. You have Odell Beckham Jr., who hasn't played in the NFL in a year and a half, and you have Zay Flowers, who is a rookie. Couldn't give him a super high rank for that. Running backs, there will be some value there. It's just, is it all going to go to J.K. Dobbins? Is it going to be Gus Edwards? How is it going to look in this Todd Monken scheme that's moving away from a run-dominant force from the Greg Roman scheme? And I talked about why I'm kind of falling a little bit on J.K. Dobbins and thinking he's a little bit overvalued currently in drafts. But they do get a high marks, and if it wasn't for Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews would be that dude. So Cleveland Browns, however, I think I did give them a very high marks for their wide receiver position. I just, despite, the uncertainty of Elijah Moore, maybe Cedric Tillman comes out. I am a little bit higher on Cedric Tillman than most people, but I think Amari Cooper in that 4th round, he is the clear guy. Even with Jacoby Brissett last year, he was a top 10 fantasy wide receiver, and he's still incredibly talented. I think he's one of the guys that a lot of people are sleeping on in the 4th round. If you can snag him, maybe at the 4th, 5th turn, I think that is an incredible wide receiver too, if you want to go running back heavy and maybe take a onesie position early on in drafts. I'm out on Deshaun Watson, but I have to respect what the fantasy community says about him. I gave him an average score of 3, and obviously a lot of people are high on Njoku. I gave him kind of average across the board, so I gave him, and then obviously, you have the dominant force of Nick Chubb. He's going to be absolutely tremendous, a guy that, I would take at the 1-2 turn if all the wide receiver prospects I thought were gone really around there. So they definitely get high marks from there. Obviously, I view them as an above average team, and coming in that 9 to 13 range, I think indicates, pretty accurately them being a slightly above average team for fantasy football. In 14, at the 14th, we have 3 teams tied for 14th. So 14th, 15th, and 16th go to the Chicago Bears, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Miami Dolphins. Chicago Bears, I think these are teams that accurately fit into this range because they're all teams that could be quite volatile. A lot of uncertainty around all 3 of these teams. So maybe we don't need out of volatility index, because as I talk about this, I'm realizing that I incorporated volatility into how I rank the position groups. But again, might be easier if we just indicated that separately. But these teams, I think they do belong in this average period, at least in the state of the preseason where the season hasn't started yet, because there's so much unknown. Chicago Bears, will Justin Fields take that step? Will DJ Moore come in and be an alpha wide receiver? Will Darnell Mooney be viable if Justin Fields does take that step? A lot of it is about so much uncertainty, a lot of projection in the offseason. Yes, Justin Fields was a cheat code for fantasy at the end of last season, but it's not guaranteed that he's going to take that Jalen Hurts step the way Jalen took last year. And I've kind of indicated that it's probably not as easy of projection as well with Jalen Hurts, because Jalen Hurts, based on several metrics, one that I'll reference was PFF, was that he had a very logarithmic increase in as far as passer rating year over year from his time dating all the way back to Alabama. He was consistently getting better 6 or 7 points every single year from Alabama to Oklahoma into his time with the NFL. Justin Fields, on the other hand, he was great in college, and then he kind of fell off in his rookie and sophomore season. So I think it's harder to project someone getting back to a level they used to be at rather than someone who's been showing improvement steadily throughout the past few seasons. And obviously, as Justin Fields goes, the rest of the offense is going to go. We don't know how Khalil Herbert's going to interact with a rushing quarterback. We don't know if he's going to be able to sustain multiple receiving threats. Maybe it might be DJ Moore's the only viable wide receiver, but if he does develop as a passer, then you can start to throw in Darnell Mooney or Cole Kmet as well. I just think they get a massive bump for having a absolutely horrific defense. Seattle Seahawks, again, the uncertainty there relies in, what is JSN going to do? Big factor with him getting that broken wrist coming into the season. He should be out for, I anticipate, 4 to 5 games. I think with them having the bye week in week 6, kind of gives them a great timetable to let JSN recover, then come back after the bye. Kind of gets a freebie there as a rest week. But Geno Smith, I love him to death. He's a great quarterback, but he is average. So kind of gets a little bit marks there. We didn't see a tremendous involvement in tight end, so you back off there, and then there's so much uncertainty. While they did get really, really high marks for the wide receiver position, how? Because we can never have nice things with Pete Carroll. He looks at us and says, wow, Kenneth Walker, this gift to fantasy football, this true workhorse running back in this age of committees, let's take Zach Charbonnet in the second round. I was going to say a bad word there, but I refrained. Probably will come out later in the episode, though. I have terrible self-control. But we don't know how this timeshare is going to look with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. I think they're going to vulture the most important aspects of the other game. With Kenneth Walker, we saw him as a great pure runner coming out of Michigan State, but he needed to get better with his goal line efficiency and his pass catching. Guess what Zach Charbonnet does incredibly well? He's a great pass catcher, and he is dominant on the goal line. But he's not going to be used as heavily with Kenneth Walker being the guy that is going to get the work in between the 20s. I think they're going to capture his upside, and it's going to be completely aggregating and drive fantasy managers insane all of 2023. And then finally with Miami Dolphins, Tua. And the running back room with Jeff Wilson and Devon Achane both starting the season injured. But Tua, that is the biggest question mark in the NFL right now. I don't know what to do. I'm hoping for his sake, for his mental health, for the CTE aspect of it, for the love of the game, that he is going to be healthy, that he becomes a great quarterback, but we just don't know, as he's been susceptible to the concussions and consider retirement this offseason. We just don't know. Tied for 17th, so 3 teams tied for 17th. It's going to surprise you a little bit. The New York Giants, New Orleans Saints, and the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, this is right around that average of the NFL, and I'll start with the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes got that bonus point because he's the best quarterback in the NFL. Travis Kelce gets that bonus point because he's the best tight end in the NFL. But what on earth do we do with these skill position players? They really fall down the board here because I gave them both threes and wide receivers and running backs. I mean, we only have to look at preseason game 2 where they threw the ball to 18 different pass catchers, whether it's running backs, wide receivers, or tight ends. There's going to be so much, I know parity isn't the right word, but so much just variation in who gets the passes from Patrick Mahomes, especially now with Travis Kelce being injured and potentially missing the opening week or the opening game on Thursday night. I genuinely think they're going to probably use 8 to 9 pass catchers, but no one's going to get more than 60, 70 yards a game. No one's going to get more than 1 touchdown. It's going to be absolutely infuriating trying to throw someone out there and have them hit a ceiling when it comes to fantasy football. So I'm kind of staying away from the depth options because none of them you could really project with certainty last season, and it led to a lot of infuriation, whether it was like people trying to guess the McCole Hardman game, the MVS game, so on and so forth. New York Giants, obviously, they're really riding on the strength of the Darren Waller hype in the preseason. I'm not getting on the hype train yet, but I will acquiesce to the markets, and I did rank him, give them a number 4 for the tight end, which is the second highest you could possibly get. And obviously Saquon is Saquon. He gets incredibly high marks. But again, they are limited by the fact that they do have a kind of an average quarterback in Daniel Jones, and their wide receiver room is, the Oompa Loompas of mediocrity is what I would like to call their wide receiver room. And then New Orleans Saints, again, we have a lot of projection. We have a lot of potential for that offense, but there are certain issues that I see that are going to hold it back. Derek Carr, average quarterback, he gets a 3. You have Chris Olave projected to take that next step, and I do anticipate him to take that next step. Where's Michael Thomas? Outside of Chris Olave, they're going to have another viable receiving threat. can Michael Thomas stay healthy? Will Rashid Shaheed be a great wide receiver option? Will A.T. Perry be a great late round sale at the wide receiver position? I just don't know, and I can't give him very high marks outside of Olave. The running back position, you have Kendre Miller, who cannot seem to escape that injury bug. I'm so excited for him. He was one of my top 5 rated running back prospects coming into the NFL. I was loving the fact that he went to the New Orleans Saints, basically changing the guard from Alvin Kamara. But who knows when he's going to actually take over that position, given his vast injury history in his short time with the team. And also they get dinged for marks in the running back position due to Alvin Kamara's, first off, his lack of inefficiency last year, which I've been kind of screaming from the mountaintops that no one really wants to acknowledge, that he just dropped off as far as his yards per catch and yards after contact. But also with the 3-game suspension, gets him a little bit dinged there. And I know they have Taysom Hill. Not buying into it. They get very low marks at the tight end position as well. For the 20th, I think, again, this might be, reflection of my own bias. I admit that this was an arbitrary ranking. So at 20 and 21, you have the New York Jets and the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's hard for me to get excited for a lot of the pieces here. Both, I kind of gave them average quarterback marks. But, with the New York Jets, I think we're going to see, especially with Corey Davis retiring, what happened with Justin Jefferson last season. We saw teams figure out double the guy, and there's zero threats outside of him. They'll be forced to target their tight end, who's going to be CJ Uzomah, or maybe their secondary wide receiver, and Alan Lazard, who really could never break out back in Green Bay. I think it's, when you're so top heavy and so dominant at the wide receiver position, you're going to get double teamed. It's going to make Garrett Wilson's life so much harder. They do have a great running back room. The talent on paper is incredible, but I think for fantasy football, I dinged it a little bit. I gave it a 6 because who are you going to start each week? Is it going to be the Dalvin game? Is it going to be the Breece Hall game? Will Izzy Abanikanda come in and steal some carries? Michael Carter's still on the roster. So while overall they might have the most talent at the running back position, predicting who's going to get, the most workload, that's going to be the infuriating part. And it definitely, bringing in Dalvin, vultures a lot of the upside of the running back position. And I struggled to pull CJ Uzomah's name for tight end, which should give you an indication of why I ranked that a little bit low. Pittsburgh Steelers, again, just a really, really rough division in the AFC North. I do anticipate Pickett taking a little bit of an upgrade here, but, he's not going to be a guy that is going to break sort of records. He really doesn't have that scrambling ability, and I think they're going to give the ball quite a bit to Najee Harris, but, they didn't really add too much as far as the offensive playmakers goes. They actually, they replaced, they brought in Allen Robinson, who I think is a non-factor, but you have Deontay Johnson. They traded away Chase Claypool, and they have George Pickens. I think people are getting a little bit hyped over George Pickens. I just don't think he's going to have the target share to be sustainable. And Deontay Johnson's just never proven himself. I think he's a great undervalued target, but, I'm basing this off of history. I'm not trying to, project that he's going to completely bounce back and have, an 8-touchdown season. So this is why I kind of ranked him a little bit lower. Number 22, our first one that's not sharing a ranking. Number 22 is going to be the Los Angeles Rams. You get really high marks for Cooper Kupp. But again, Matthew Stafford at this point in his career, with his point with injuries, gives you really average score. Not really sold in the tight end position, with Tyler Higbee having 2 disappointing seasons for fantasy, not for NFL, for fantasy. Let's reiterate, this is a rankings for fantasy football relevancy. And also, I'm just not sold on Cam Akers. I know a lot of people love him as that middle round RB dead zone kind of sleeper pick. Maybe they project him as this year's Josh Jacobs. I just don't think that there's going to be, there are certain red flags. The offensive line is a big one for me. The tensions between Cam Akers and the head coaching staff is also a big one for me. I just couldn't rank him as highly as I've ranked some of the other running back classes here. And I just think with how pitiful that team is as a whole, and we saw this last season, and not really making, incredible leaps forward in the offseason, they will be kind of another team that, outside of maybe Cooper Kupp and the occasional Matthew Stafford week, it's going to be very frustrating to have these players rostered on your team. Number 23 is going to be the Green Bay Packers, and right now I ranked a lot of these players very low. Again, the talent is absolutely there. Luke Musgraves looks incredibly talented at the tight end position. We have Christian Watson, who could be a dominant, explosive wide receiver, has all the traits and talents to be one of the most athletic wide receivers in the NFL. We have Jordan Love, who showed moments of brilliance in coming in after sitting behind Aaron Rodgers as a first-round pick, learning a lot of great information from Aaron Rodgers over 3 years. We just don't know. The volatility for this team is off the charts. So the fact that I have to project a lot of what this team is going to do outside of essentially the running back room, which really only has the only veterans on the team with Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, I gave him quite low marks, kind of, building in that volatility aspect into having 2 rookie tight ends, having a rookie neophyte quarterback, and obviously, 2 sophomore year wide receivers with Jaden Reed coming in as a rookie this season. We just don't know. It's going to be an experiment. I mean, it could be great. It could be horrible. We do not know. And I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a future teller. If I was, I'd be in Vegas gambling on everything, but I'm not. So because of that volatility, I have to rank them this low. Denver Broncos, we've said this over and over and over again. There are so many more issues than just a head coaching change. Russell Wilson, I think, when you lose it at the quarterback position, you lose it fast and you lose it hard. I think we saw the beginning of the end 2 years ago in Seattle. I don't think last season was a mirage. I think that's kind of what Russell Wilson is now. And I think, coming into the season, I think he's an average quarterback. I gave him average marks here in my rankings. The wide receiver room has been decimated. Tim Patrick injury, KJ Hamler cut with a heart condition. Courtland Sutton's just not breaking out. We have the hamstring injury with Jerry Jeudy. Marvin Mims comes in, but it's not something that really instills confidence in me. Javonte actually gave quite good marks on, just because, again, I have been rising on him throughout the offseason. But again, I think why the Broncos are so low, I gave him one of the best rankings for defense. I think it's going to be very similar to last year where they win games with defense. They're not going to be putting up a ton of points offensively. They're going to be winning games. If they do win games, that is. I project them to hit the under this year if you're a betting man. But they're going to be scoring between 15 to 21 points a game. I don't think it's going to be a very high scoring margin for them just because how good their defense is, and a lot of low scoring games coming out of the Broncos last season. I feel like that's going to be the same this season. Tied for 25, we do have 3 teams. We have the Washington Commanders. Again, I think it's very similar to the ilk of the Green Bay Packers, where we just don't know. There's so much uncertainty around a very, very, very young team. I think there's a lot of bright spots on this team, Jahan Dotson being one of them. But with Terry McLaurin getting injured, I did have to bring back the wide receiver ranking just a little bit. With Sam Howell being a sophomore, I do love, what he's shown in the preseason. I think he can be great, but without him actually producing it on an NFL field, I have to take that volatility into account, and I gave them quite a low quarterback ranking as 2 out of 5. Running backs, I just think that neither one of them is going to take a stranglehold on the position and be a true top 20 guy for the entirety of the season. I think both Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson will have relevancy, but they'll be, that 20 to 25 range of running backs, and we don't really even know who their tight end is outside of Logan Thomas, who can't stay on the field. But again, they're another team very similar to the Denver Broncos that comes in, has a good defense. I think they're going to win games with defensive prowess, and, maybe not the most highest of scoring games, especially being in a very tough division like the NFC East. Let's see. Tampa, 2 other teams are Arizona Cardinals, Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans right now are just, the picture of mediocrity for me. DeAndre Hopkins, I know he's been a top 5 wide receiver in the past, but I'm just not buying his transition to the Titans being a good one. It's the same thing we talked about with Drake London last year. Drake London set his historic number for target share as a rookie. But when that target share is out of 9 passes, it is crap. It is mediocre and does not translate to fantasy success at all. Last season, the Tennessee Titans truly were the worst team when it came to passing offense. Any sort of as far as they were last in the NFL in passing plays and passing yards. Just the passing offense is not going to be there, so it really brings down the wide receiver score. It really brings down the tight end score. The quarterbacks, I gave him a 1. I'm not sold on Tannehill. I think he's kind of washed past his prime, and both Malik and Will Levis, while they're both great quarterbacks, I think they're both too raw to facilitate any sort of fantasy relevance. They just get major marks for having Derrick Henry on their team, and that's really where the bulk of their points comes from. Arizona Cardinals, just because of the fact they cut Colt McCoy and they're starting either Clayton Tune or Joshua Dobbs, they get an absolute 1 in the quarterback position, and with them being starting as quarterback, seeing how ineffective they were in the preseason, absolutely tanks the wide receiver ranking as well. I mean, I was higher on Marquise Brown earlier in the offseason when I thought Colt McCoy could facilitate this offense, as he is a competent quarterback, but with those 2 at the quarterback position, down. Zach Ertz being injured. Also, tight ends rely on pass catching. That position goes down as well. I mean, they do get above average marks for James Conner, a guy who I've maintained my steadfast love and loyalty to. And maybe they do deserve to be higher because, again, if you look at the consistency metric, James Conner will be the image of consistency, getting 25, 30 touches a game, which is what they indicated they were going to do with that position after Kyler Murray got injured in Week 11 of last season. Rounding it out here, we have at 28 tied here at 28. We have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New England Patriots. Not a believer in Baker Mayfield after his bouncing around the league last year. I don't think he's going to facilitate a tremendous pass catching offense. Again, we talked about, I think Rachaad White is going to be a good running back, but when I ranked him in my running back room rankings, they seem like they are in a good situation, but they might be an over their head, a guy that might be young, might not totally be in control behind a pretty putrid offensive line after they had some retirements and injuries this offseason. I think the Tampa Bay Bucks offense is going to be absolutely putrid, so they get quite low ranks for wide receivers, for tight ends. I don't believe Cade Otton's going to make that jump. I just don't think he is that guy. You still have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. They get above average marks for that, but with how abysmal the rest of the team around them is, especially being with a putrid offensive line blowing up the run game left, right, and center, and with Baker Mayfield being one of those quarterbacks that doesn't operate well under pressure, I think it's going to be a lot of frustration for Buccaneers players, managers this season. New England Patriots, I don't believe in Mac Jones. I don't like I don't think he's going to be the future of that quarterback. I don't think that team. I don't think he's a franchise quarterback. Also, they have one of the worst receiving rooms in the league, in my humble opinion. I don't believe in Juju Smith-Schuster coming in there and being an alpha target. I don't believe in Devontae Parker. Tyquan Thornton is just a deep threat, and I don't think Mac Jones has the arm to facilitate getting it to him consistently. So I definitely rank them very, very low when it comes to their wide receiver room. Tight ends, you have an okay. You're okay with Hunter Henry, and then the running back room, I think I would have gotten more points. Frankly, if they didn't sign Ezekiel Elliott, they would have gotten more points. But I think, signing Ezekiel Elliott makes this running back room a little bit more cloudy. You don't get that upside. You're going to have a lot of the goal line work vultured by Ezekiel Elliott, but he won't get enough goal line work to actually, convince you to start him week in and week out. And Ramondre will be in that situation where, he'll get good passing work. He'll get good between the 20s work, but without those touchdowns to really put the cap on his performance, he'll be leaving you with like 15, 16-point weeks where you're just itching for more out of a true every down back. So yeah, a lot of especially also being in a tremendously difficult division like the AFC East, I have to put them there. At number 30, the Carolina Panthers, they get a 1 for their quarterback situation. Again, historically with quarterbacks coming in, that's not really relevant for fantasy. It's very odd that this will ever entertain a fantasy relevant or a fantasy top 10 quarterback, especially with the concerns I have at Bryce Young's size. I gave him a 1 at the wide receiver room. I don't think that's unheard of as well. I mean, between DJ Chark, Jonathan Mingo, Terrace Marshall, and Adam Thielen, it's quite putrid. They do get above average marks because for my boy Miles Sanders, who I've been preaching for all offseason. And again, if we want to talk about, maybe a team, if I've been so high on Carolina and if I've been saying Hayden Hurst is my sleeper tight end, why are they so low? Well, maybe this is why we need to factor in, that strength of schedule. They have one of the their top 8 easiest schedules in the NFL. Maybe they need to bump that up just based off matchup alone. Also, when you talk about consistency, you're looking at Miles Sanders, who doesn't have too much of a threat from Chuba Hubbard. Maybe they have to bump up on how consistent I think a lot of their pieces can be. Once they figure out who their wide receiver 1 is going to be, I don't think there's going to be too much threat outside of there. It's not going to be like the 49ers will have a Debo game and then an Ayuk game and then a CMC game. I think it's going to be pretty week in, week out. You'll steadily see a lot of production from Miles Sanders. Number 31, Indianapolis Colts. Drama. I mean, basically they should cancel Hard Knocks. I know it's doing really well with the Jets this offseason, but just ship all the filming equipment down to Indianapolis for the Jonathan Taylor drama. Losing him was a massive downgrade, so they get a pretty putrid score in the running back room as of right now, because I just don't anticipate him even taking the field this season, even though he's still on the team. The wide receiver room, I did give an average score. I gave a 3 to Anthony Richardson for his running prowess, but I think his throwing arm leaves a lot to be desired. His accuracy leaves a ton to be desired. I don't think that'll facilitate a great passing offense, so I gave them pretty putrid scores with the wide receivers and tight ends as well. I've been very hesitant on drafting any wide receivers or pass catchers from the Indianapolis Colts this season. Michael Pittman I have a 0% exposure to him on my teams. Last and least is going to be the Houston Texans. Again, I think this is pretty indicative of them being the worst team for fantasy, as well as one of the worst teams in the NFL. They have a rookie quarterback. It's going to take some time for him to get adjusted to the NFL. They don't have a tremendous offensive line. They have a pretty putrid wide receiver room who has, I think it's the most inexperienced wide receiver room in the NFL, with Nico Collins, Jonathan Mechie as having never played a game, Tank Dell never playing a game, Xavier Hutchinson never playing a game. You have Dalton Schultz, who's an average tight end, but then again, Dameon Pierce falls in the same thing I talked about with Rachaad White, where, the situation looks good on the outset, but they might be a little bit in over their heads. There's not the offense around them to really facilitate a good balanced attack. If you are really the only true threat on that offense, a lot of teams will be packing the box to stop Dameon Pierce week in and week out until we can see one of these wide receivers potentially elevate themselves, or CJ Stroud elevate himself as a competent passer. So that's going to wrap it up for my rankings. I hope you enjoyed. If there is people who want to see this put out and see all the individual scores, I will potentially link the Google Sheets to my Twitter at TwinTakesFF, so you can see what my arbitrary rankings ended up being, and any feedback on how to make these rankings a little bit more accurate, or any other categories I should add. Feel free to put those in the comments below. Now for redraft, it's been fun. If you're not interested in Dynasty, you're probably going to click off, because I do want to touch on Dynasty this week. Again, this is a channel that goes into Dynasty, so we'll do our little Dynasty corner at the end of these long-form videos every Tuesday and Wednesday. Just some guys that I really want to touch on. So for the Dynasty corner, Keon Coleman is him. That dude blew me away with his performance on Sunday night against LSU. That man is going to be a problem in the NFL. He is my overreaction right now, skyrocketing up to my number 2 wide receiver in this class behind Marvin Harrison. I'm not crazy. I'm putting him over Marvin, but Keon Coleman, 6'4", 215, 3 touchdowns, winning 2 of those touchdowns at the point of attack. Great contested catch ability to high point the ball. On the first touchdown, he broke a tackle, and then that acceleration after the ball. I am in love. Keon Coleman skyrocketing in my ranks, a guy that needs to be on your radar right now. Moving on to a guy that I'm a huge fan of, but I just don't know is going to be great for fantasy football, because it's obviously the transition from college to the NFL. Shedeur Sanders. Listen, as a college player, he is incredible. He is so mature. He is so smart. He's intelligent. The football IQ is there. I mean, he has that L on his chest because he is a leader. He has all the intangibles he wants, but I do kind of correlate him to kind of the Hendon Hooker of last year, where he's in a offensive scheme that does work well for him and helps him mask some of his deficiencies. His arm strength leaves something to be desired for me. His windup takes way too long. When he's throwing down the field more than 20 plus air yards, it's way too much of a setup that I think will not fly in the NFL. He's an incredible athlete. He's an incredible talent. He's going to be an incredible college football player and fun to watch. And I love what Deion Sanders is doing with that team. I just don't know if he has the athletic skill sets and traits to play quarterback at the NFL level. If you're in a Devy league, maybe you capitalize on that hype right now and trade him away for some other assets. But also, and if you're in a dynasty league, I'm kind of backing off, projecting him as like a first-round quarterback or a guy that I'd be targeting going into next season. But a quarterback I do want to pay attention to, a guy that I think does need to be on everyone's radars and firmly cemented himself as a guy to watch going forward. Michael Penix Jr., quarterback for the University of Washington. Dude is tough. Dude played an incredible game this past Saturday, and definitely a guy that is on my watch list. Threw 5 touchdowns. I mean, his poise in the pocket, his ability to throw the ball downfield. He has an absolute cannon of an arm, and again, unlike Shedeur, he's a guy that, his delivery is NFL ready. It's compact, it's quick, and it gets the ball right on the money. Not too many off-kilter throws. I really love what I saw out of Michael Penix Jr., a guy that I'm definitely watching for the rest of the college football season. So that's going to include some dynasty names to follow for this week. As far as projections for this week, we're going to transition to making specific player projections into shorts. So I do have some guys that I want to talk about. You'll start seeing shorts come out maybe tomorrow through Thursday, Friday, maybe even Saturday. I'll start it off with maybe 5 to 10 shorts. I really don't want to flood your subscription pages or your inbox with, just really useless shorts about players that you already know about. But, I'll probably pick 5 to 10 interesting players, make a quick blurb about them, whether I'm in on them that week or whether I sit them down this week. And any feedback you guys want to give me on that would be greatly appreciated. How to, make that content more digestible for you. If I need to do more, if you really like the shorts and you want me to produce more, happy to go ahead and do that. If they're not cutting it for you, maybe we go back to doing like last year where it was, a 30-minute video previewing the matches and guys that I like from each matchup and what I think makes matchups interesting. So I want to start out with the shorts. I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be better content for me to produce and better content for you guys to consume. But again, it'll be fun to try out. But as always, enjoy Thursday Night Football, Kansas City versus Detroit Lions. And then obviously so pumped for the week 1 of NFL. And we're going to overreact to everything next Tuesday. But until then, guys, take care.